It began with a breeze. A soft, almost imperceptible sweep of air along the manicured trees of Kingsfield Avenue. The late afternoon sun slanted across the rows of polished Teslas and Mercedes, making the luxury vehicles shimmer like pieces in a showroom. Every corner of Oakwood Heights seemed curated, where even the silence was intentional and cleanliness was part of the zoning code. No litter, no shouting, no struggle. Just symmetry and status. At the edge of the neighborhood stood Berkeley and Row, a supermarket that didn't sell food so much as it sold identity. The architecture alone, all gleaming glass and brushed steel, declared its clientele. Here, fruit was not just fresh, it was ethically sourced, pesticide-free, and priced to reflect that only the right people should access it. Inside, shoppers moved like dancers in a performance they didn't know they were part of. The overhead speakers hummed Vivaldi softly. Everything smelled like lavender and imported citrus. No noise, no mess, no emotion, just taste, class, and the sense that everything belonged exactly where it was. And then Jasmine Crockett walked in. She didn't wear makeup. Her coat was beige, plain, tailored but old. Her canvas bag looked out of place, not leather, not branded, just cloth, with the faded words, "Speak truth even if your voice shakes." Her posture was upright, her steps quiet but certain. She carried no badge of status, no assistance, no visible title. But in her, there was gravity. Not one of money, but of experience. The kind of weight that comes from standing your ground when the floor has tried to swallow you. Jasmine Crockett was a United States Congresswoman. But today, she was just a black woman entering a space that didn't want to be reminded of who it left out. The door slid shut behind her with a hush. No alarm sounded, no warning bell rang. But the atmosphere shifted. She felt it before it became visible. The slight pause of an older man with a shopping list as she passed. The barely perceptible tug of a woman's hand on her husband's sleeve in the produce section. The way a store clerk's glance followed her without blinking, as if waiting to catch something wrong before it happened. And then the cameras, some official, mounted discreetly in the ceiling corners. Others handheld, hidden behind the pretense of checking messages. Jasmine had learned long ago how to read a room. She'd survived law school, backdoor congressional hearings, subtle dismissals, and overt insults. But what she felt here was different. It wasn't political. It was primal. Fear dressed up as etiquette. Racism dressed in silence. She reached for grapes. She wasn't even in the store 7 minutes when they appeared. 2 police officers, both white, neither pretending they had business elsewhere. One older, built like a monument, with a jawline etched by power and entitlement. The other younger, eager, sharp-eyed, barely hiding his anticipation. They stood at the end of the aisle like they were waiting for a cue. Jasmine turned away, pretending not to notice. She knew how the script began. First came the pretext. A vague call, a report of suspicious behavior. Maybe someone claimed she was acting erratic, or watching people. Then the approach, the confrontation, the demand for identification. And always, always, the threat beneath it, unspoken but sharp. The system behind them, ready to believe their word over hers. Even with a badge in her purse and congressional clearance in her email, none of it mattered here. The loudspeaker crackled above, soft and casual, almost polite. Security to produce. Section 3. Situation to review. The air changed. She tightened her grip on the shopping cart handle. She didn't run, didn't flinch, just exhaled slowly. The sound of footsteps followed. Not rushed, deliberate, heavy. The kind of walk that said, "We're in control, and you're a problem." When Mitchell and Harris approached, they didn't ask if she needed help. They didn't smile. They simply stood in front of her cart and looked down like she was already under arrest. The older one, Mitchell, spoke first. "Ma'am, we received a call. You've been walking around this area without making a purchase. Can you explain what you're doing here?" Jasmine blinked slowly. "I'm picking out fruit," she said, evenly, loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. Didn't know choosing between red and green grapes was suspicious behavior now. Harris snorted. Mitchell didn't. He leaned in. Do you have ID? Yes, she replied, reaching calmly into her bag. She moved carefully, every motion deliberate. She knew how things escalated. But before her fingers touched her wallet, Mitchell grabbed her wrist. Not hard, but tight enough to make her stumble. Her shoulder hit the grape display. A few fruit dropped and split open, leaking juice onto the floor like tiny wounds. Don't resist, Mitchell snapped, already raising his voice. I haven't done anything, she said. That's excessive force. You have the right to remain silent, Harris cut in, voice almost gleeful. And I suggest you start now. All around them, silence bloomed. People turned away. The mother by the almond milk display bent down to tie her shoes. The man in the business suit stared blankly at his cart of arugula. The music kept playing, soft and perfect, as if pretending it could drown out reality. No one helped. No one asked why. They watched Jasmine get cuffed and led away like she was a known thief, like she had broken the sacred peace of the store by existing. But no one knew what she knew. No one knew who she was. Outside, the air had cooled, but Jasmine felt nothing. The cuffs around her wrists were tight, too tight, cutting just enough to remind her this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a message. They walked her past gleaming sidewalks, past the same cars that had silently judged her when she entered. People on patios sipped espresso and turned their heads. None intervened. Her presence had always been tolerated, but her restraint confirmed something they all already suspected. A woman like her didn't belong here. The police car smelled of old leather and denial. The rear door slammed shut behind her with finality. No sirens. No urgency, just quiet humiliation driven slowly down streets designed to look like perfection. Inside the vehicle, Jasmine sat upright. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She memorized the route they took, the names on their badges, the words they used. Every word mattered now, every glance, every timestamp. Precinct 18 looked as it always had in her case files, tired, gray, and soulless. It was a building with history, but not the kind that earned plaques. It was where complaints vanished, where body cams malfunctioned, where people walked in and didn't always walk back out with their names intact. The sign over the door read, "Public Safety First," but the paint was chipped, and the F in "First" had been scratched out so many times that it looked more like a warning than a promise. Harris opened the door. Mitchell didn't speak. They didn't read her rights. No one logged her entry. She wasn't processed. She was stored. Inside, the walls were yellowed, lined with laminated posters about procedure no one followed. A hallway reeked faintly of bleach and something fouler beneath it, something institutional, like secrets ground into the floor. No one made eye contact. Jasmine's boots echoed as she was led past doors she knew too well from oversight reports. Interview Room 3, Disciplinary Holding, Internal Review. At the end of one hallway was a desk where a woman named Turner sat, typing without looking up. On her screen, Jasmine glimpsed a surveillance interface, timestamps, playback buttons, file logs. Turner moved quickly, dragging footage into a folder, selecting options, then pressing delete. Over and over. One of the files she erased was labeled market_main_aisle_14_1542. Jasmine's breath caught. That was the exact moment Mitchell had grabbed her wrist. No password prompts. No confirmation screens. Just deletion. Routine, casual, precise. Turner wasn't panicking. This wasn't improvisation. It was habit. They placed Jasmine in a chair bolted to the floor. Her hands still cuffed. The room had no nameplate, no clocks. No one asked questions. Mitchell paced, on his phone again. "Yes, sir," he said softly. "She fits the profile. No ID shown. Loitering. Minor resistance. We've got it under control. Nobody knows who she is." Callahan's informed. "Whitaker will see the report before morning. Kensington's office is in the loop." The names hit Jasmine like lead weights. Callahan, the police chief notorious for disappearing records. Judge Whitaker, who had once tried to shut her down during a public hearing on police abuse. Kensington, the mayor, all of them tied together like a net designed to catch people like her. But they had made one crucial error. They assumed she was alone. When Mitchell stepped out to take another call, Jasmine shifted her position. Her cuffs remained tight, her eyes locked onto the desk phone just 5 feet away. It was nothing special, black, plastic, government issue. But she recognized the model. It was connected to the interagency emergency line, and she had memorized the override code. Slowly, carefully, Jasmine twisted her torso, inching the chair forward. The metal scraped softly against the linoleum, each movement a small rebellion. She lifted her cuffed hands as high as they would go, reached, and dialed. *9, 6-digit code. Then she waited. The line clicked once. Then a voice. Familiar. Firm. "Hello? Jeremiah," she whispered. "It's me." Silence. Then the voice sharpened. "Jazz, where are you?" "Precinct 18, she said. "They don't know who I am. I've been cuffed for over 4 hours. They're deleting footage. They're coordinating a cover-up. Callahan, Mitchell, Whitaker, even Kensington. They're all part of it." There was no answer. She didn't need one. She knew her brother. And Jeremiah Crockett was not just a brother. He was the Attorney General of the United States. She hung up the phone. Mitchell walked back in 30 seconds later. He didn't notice the phone out of place. He didn't know that the woman he thought he had trapped had already lit a fuse. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, blood seeping along her wrist from the metal bite of the cuffs. But inside her, something stirred, not vengeance, not rage. Something colder, clearer. She had the truth, and now, she had time. In Washington, D.C., 3 time zones away, Jeremiah Crockett stood in the center of his office at the Department of Justice. The phone still pressed to his ear even after the line had gone dead. The silence on the other end was not empty. It was filled with a message, heavy and unspoken. Jasmine hadn't called to be saved. She had called to ignite something. Jeremiah wasn't just her brother. He was the most powerful legal figure in the country, and he now understood that his sister had been swallowed by the very system they were both supposed to be fixing. But this wasn't oversight anymore. This was personal. He turned without a word, eyes burning, voice steady. "Get me the Director of Federal Investigations, Internal Affairs, and Emergency Response. We initiate Code 123J. Now." Assistants scrambled. Lights that were once dim came alive. Entire floors of the Justice Department lit up like a war room. Within minutes, emails were being recalled, flight manifests rerouted, databases unlocked. Jeremiah walked through the halls like a man pacing the fuse of a charge. Every step deliberate, every order surgical. "I want every complaint against Precinct 18 in the last 10 years. Every internal memo, every erased body cam, every name on the cover-ups. I want dossiers on Callahan, Mitchell, Whitaker, and Kensington. I want records, I want lawsuits, I want suppressed footage. If it's been buried, dig it up. If it's sealed, unseal it. If it's missing, that's the evidence." Elsewhere, encrypted federal servers spun into motion. Legal teams were activated. Prosecutors reviewed dormant files with red pens and fury. Special Task Force 72, the federal reconstruction team, was dispatched before the ink on the orders had time to dry. Their orders were not investigative. They were surgical. Extract Jasmine Crockett. Seize all internal records. Freeze personnel. Secure communications. Detain obstructors. And move before sunrise. Back at Precinct 18, Turner sipped her 4th cup of coffee, deleting more footage with a numbness that only comes from years of impunity. Mitchell leaned back in a worn leather chair, feet up, dictating the draft of Jasmine's fabricated report. Harris was filing a checklist of falsified accusations, incooperative, defensive posture, raised voice, possible threat. They were so certain no one would question it, certain no one would ask who she was. certain that Jasmine would be processed, erased, then dumped like all the others. But they never considered that the woman they had in chains didn't need to scream. She had made one call, and that call had awakened the wrath of the one man who could destroy them without firing a shot. At 3:48 a.m., a convoy of unmarked federal SUVs pulled into the district. No sirens, no announcements, just rolling engines and purpose. The vehicles parked silently outside Precinct 18 like black chess pieces arranged with intent. No one inside noticed. The front desk was empty. Officers had started their shifts the way they always had, half asleep, half indifferent. But within minutes, the glass doors opened with purpose. 32 agents moved as one, black uniforms bearing the golden insignia of federal authority. They moved quickly, precisely, without raising their voices. One team entered through the front, the second through the garage, the third breached the records room. They didn't knock, they didn't wait. Turner looked up just in time to see her screen go black. The server had been taken offline. A gloved hand reached past her shoulder and unplugged the terminal. Federal seizure, the agent said. Step away from the desk. Mitchell had just stepped out of the interview room when two agents flanked him from opposite ends of the hallway. Brad Mitchell, one of them said, voice cold. You are under arrest for obstruction of justice, falsifying evidence, unlawful detainment, and collusion with judicial authorities. He blinked. Wait, he didn't finish. One agent twisted his arm back, the other restrained his legs. In seconds, the man who had crushed people with silence was face down, cuffed, and shaking. Harris tried to run. He made it 2 steps before being thrown against the wall, his badge clattering to the floor like an obsolete weapon. Upstairs, Callahan reached for his desk phone. It was already dead. His laptop flashed red, federal override. He looked out the window, saw the SUVs, saw the jackets, saw his career vanish in real time. He turned to run. The door opened. 4 agents. Robert Callahan, the lead agent, said, "Hands where we can see them." He didn't argue. He sat down, defeated. The hallway went quiet. Then a voice spoke. "Where is she?" Agent Eliza Monroe, Jeremiah's most trusted operative, stepped into the center of the building holding a federal warrant the size of a ledger. "Bring me Jasmine Crockett, now." No one moved. No one dared refuse. The cell door creaked open. Inside, Jasmine had not slept. She had not eaten, but she stood. When Monroe entered, Jasmine didn't speak. Monroe didn't speak either. She reached into her pocket, retrieved a small key, and unlocked the cuffs. The sound they made was small, but it echoed like thunder. Jasmine rubbed her wrists, but not out of pain, out of habit. Out of memory. She stepped forward. Monroe stepped aside. No one tried to stop her. No one dared to speak. She walked down the hallway not as a victim, but as a reckoning. Those who had watched her be dragged now stood with their backs pressed to the wall. Not out of shame, out of fear, because now they knew. She wasn't alone. She never had been. Outside, the morning had begun its slow creep across the city. A faint haze hung in the air, blurring the skyline, but nothing could obscure what had just taken place at Precinct 18. Federal agents moved like surgeons, removing hard drives, tagging evidence, sealing entire wings of the building. Inside a van parked near the entrance, Jasmine sat quietly, sipping from a bottle of water as agents examined her wrists, documenting every mark, every bruise, every detail. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her silence by now had become louder than sirens. She had survived the silence of a system designed to crush the inconvenient, and now the system was on trial. By noon, Jeremiah stood before the press, flanked by federal officials and civil rights attorneys. "What happened at Precinct 18, he said, voice low and steady, was not a mistake. It was policy. But that policy ends now." Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But the only image that lasted was Jasmine walking past the podium, not to speak, but to enter the federal courthouse behind it. Inside, the trial was swift but meticulous. Evidence spoke louder than any closing statement. Video files restored from the backup Jordan Carter had uploaded now played on giant screens. Jasmine being cuffed, the officers laughing, Turner deleting footage. Mitchell on the phone confirming the report fabrication, Harris threatening a teenage witness. But the moment that sealed the courtroom in stunned silence was Jasmine's testimony. Dressed in gray, standing alone, she recounted every detail from memory. Each phrase spoken by Mitchell, every frame she saw on Turner's monitor, the minute she dialed the emergency code, the exact wording on the screen. Market_main_aisle_14_1542.mp4 deleted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform. She simply remembered. And that, in itself, was revolutionary. One of the defense attorneys leaned forward, skeptical. And how do you remember all of this so clearly, Congresswoman? She looked him dead in the eye. Because when you've been watched, doubted, and targeted your whole life, you don't get to forget. You survive by remembering what everyone else refuses to see. The courtroom didn't clap. They didn't need to. The stillness in that room said more than any verdict ever could. Then Jordan Carter took the stand. The young man who had once hid behind a produce shelf to record what others refused to acknowledge now walked tall into the center of the room. He held up the same phone he had used to capture it all. I knew if I deleted it, she'd be erased too, he said. And I couldn't let that happen again. His voice cracked, but he kept going. He showed the second video, the one he'd taken with his smartwatch, secretly, after Harris dragged him into an interrogation room. It showed 3 officers beating him. No legal process, no rights, no cameras, just rage. The footage was short, raw, but it was enough. It exposed everything. By the end of the trial, Callahan was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison for obstruction, abuse of power, and running a coordinated campaign of falsified detainments. Mitchell received 28 years. Harris 26. Turner, though initially considered minor, was charged with deliberate tampering of federal evidence and conspiracy to destroy protected material. She got 22. Judge Whitaker, stripped of his robes and influence, was sentenced to 35 years for judicial collusion and dereliction of constitutional duty. Mayor Kensington, who had been informed of it all and stayed silent, was indicted and sentenced to 28 years for political racketeering and complicity in systemic corruption. The city trembled, not out of fear, but out of realization. And Jasmine? She declined a second term in Congress. She didn't want power anymore. She wanted purpose. She returned not to Capitol Hill, but to the district where it all began. Precinct 18 was shuttered and renamed. The Eleanor Community Justice Center opened in its place, with walls made of glass instead of cinder block. The interrogation rooms were torn down and replaced with classrooms. On one wall, a mural painted by local high schoolers depicted a woman standing calmly with her hands raised, not in surrender, but in clarity. Beneath it, in red block letters, "Truth needs no permission to speak." Each week, Jasmine taught there. Her classes weren't about legal theory. They were about survival. How to know your rights, how to document injustice, how to fight with facts instead of fear. She didn't stand behind a lectern. She sat in a circle, knees to knees with students who had once been afraid to speak. One day, a girl asked her, "Why did you come back here, after all that?" Jasmine smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who had seen too much to ever walk away. "Because they thought I'd disappear," she said. "But instead, I decided to teach people how to never go invisible again." Outside the center, the street had changed. Fewer patrol cars, more murals. At night, the lights stayed on, not for surveillance but for safety. And sometimes, Jasmine would walk alone past the old corners where she'd once been followed. She didn't wear her congressional pin. She didn't need to. The people who passed her didn't nod out of pity. They nodded because they remembered. Because they had seen her endure what most would never survive. Because she had returned, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a blueprint. And now, across the country, from classrooms in Chicago to community halls in Baton Rouge, her story wasn't just remembered. It was taught. The People vs. Precinct 18 became more than a legal case. It became a curriculum, a reminder, a warning, a light, because in the end, Jasmine Crockett didn't just escape the system that tried to erase her. She exposed it, she survived it, she rebuilt something better in its place. And in doing so, she taught a generation what it means not just to demand,